I am a lawyer, but I am not necessarily your lawyer. The materials discussed in this podcast are for informational purposes only and should not be deemed legal advice. If you have a specific legal question according to your circumstances, then I encourage you to speak with an attorney licensed in your jurisdiction. All right, welcome back to another edition of Ag Law Today. And today we have Missy Greathouse from the Illinois Agriculture Mediation Program to talk a little bit more about this little thing called mediation and various agriculture mediation programs around the country. Missy, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Good to talk to you again. So why don't you start off and introduce yourself to our listeners and tell us more about the Illinois Agriculture Mediation Program and your position there.
Sure. So my name is Missy Greathouse. I am the executive director of a nonprofit called Dispute Resolution Institute. And our organization manages different mediation programs throughout the state of Illinois. And one of our programs is the Illinois Agricultural Mediation Program. And that program provides free mediation services to different individuals with a dispute with a USDA agency.
So I know today's podcast is sort of focused on the Illinois Agriculture Mediation Program, but what are the other types of disputes or programs that you help facilitate there?
So we also manage a family mediation program for people who cannot afford to pay for a mediator. We also manage a couple different foreclosure mediation programs, small claims mediation programs, and then if someone calls us and we can work out how to do it, we will do pretty much anything anyone calls us to do at this time.
And what's your geographic reach?
So the agricultural program is state. So that's the whole state. But our other programs are pretty much the lower part of the state. We have an office in Carbondale, Illinois, which is at the bottom of the state. We have an office in Belleville and an office in Edwardsville, and those are in the Metro East, about 20 minutes from St. Louis.
All right, Missy, I'm curious, how is the Illinois Agriculture Mediation Program funded?
So we're funded out of a grant from Farm Service Agency. It's a federal program, and it's funded out of the Farm Bill.
Okay. And what type of cases specifically are mediated through the Illinois Agriculture Mediation Program?
So currently we provide mediation to 4 USDA agencies and their participants through their appeal rights. The agencies that we're currently providing mediation for are Farm Service Agency, Rural Development, Risk Management Agency, and Natural Resources Conservation Service.
So Missy, let's break down each of those sub-agencies of the USDA one by one. For example, the FSA, the Farm Service Agency, what type of disputes would be mediated through that program?
So most of the Farm Service Agency programs, mediations are direct compliance with farm programs. So they've either applied for a program and been denied, or they were part of a program and did not comply with the program requirements. And also that would include conservation programs. So if they had land in a CRP and did not perform on the contract like they were supposed to, and FSA decided to file a adverse determination against them, they would get appeal rights as part of that to go to mediation.
Okay. And who is really there on behalf of FSA in the mediation itself?
For FSA, it would generally be the county executive director, and then one of their supervisors, usually a district director. The main reason for that is to have someone with settlement authority in the room. And so that district director comes to be able to help make a decision, and if a determination is changed, they're the ones that can make that change.
Okay, so that's the FSA. What's one of the second agencies there? Did you say the rural development?
Yeah, so rural development, most of those cases are rural housing loans. So someone received a housing loan from rural development, and then they're defaulting on that loan. And so part of their appeal rights is to go to mediation. Also with rural development, we do have some Section 8 housing contracts that sometimes come through here. But a lot of times those settle before they need to go to mediation. Those cases are ones where a landlord has a Section 8 housing requirement to have the apartment filled for 6 months, and they haven't been able to do that. And so they're at risk of losing that Section 8.
And you mentioned two other sub-agencies of the USDA. What were those again?
Risk Management Agency, and
Okay.
that one is all USDA crop insurance issues. Usually it is they've changed the determination of what their risk is on their land, which increases their premiums. So they might have been a low risk last year, and they've changed their land to a high risk this year. And so that ups their premiums, and because of that change, they get to have appeal rights. And then go ahead.
Oh, no, I just want to interrupt. So when I was associate attorney in Cheyenne, Wyoming for Bedfile and Law Offices, I had my very first crop insurance case. And for those listeners that aren't aware, your insurance is a contract, right? It's a contract between the insured and the assured insurance provider. And in those terms of the contract, there is an alternative dispute resolution clause in there. And I think that that's what Missy is referring to with mediation. Is that right?
Correct. Yes.
And then what was the fourth agency, Missy?
Natural Resources Conservation Services. And on those, it's almost always wetland determinations. Either someone has been had their land labeled as a wetland and they don't want it to be, and so they're appealing that, or their land was already a wetland and they decided to plant on it or do something that they're not supposed to do on it, and they're given appeal rights for that.
So let's back up a little bit. For those listeners who are thinking, what the heck is this mediation? How would you answer that question?
Yeah, so that's one of the biggest things, is making sure people understand what mediation is. So mediation is a confidential process where there is a third party who is neutral, and they're called the mediator. And their goal is to assist two or more people who are having some kind of issue, work through that issue, and maybe come to a resolution. They will help the parties work through and maybe identify different issues that the other party isn't hearing, and then see if they can reach some kind of mutually determined agreement. They'll usually help them write up that agreement for the parties, but it's not the mediator's agreement. They don't make any kind of determination on who's right or wrong, and they're not a decision maker.
So I don't know about you, but I feel like a lot of people are confused on the differences between mediation and arbitration. So quickly, how would you sort of address that, compare and contrast?
Yeah, one of the biggest things is mediation is generally confidential. Nothing leaves the mediation unless the parties agree to it. So that's one of the biggest things for me that is a difference. And then the other biggest thing is that the mediator is not a decision maker. Arbitration, the arbitrator will make a decision at the end of the day. And the mediation, they're just there to help the parties try to work it out together.
Yeah, I usually tell people the arbitrator is more akin to a judge, right? They're making a decision, right, whereas the mediator is just there to facilitate a conversation. So does the Illinois Agriculture Mediation Program conduct telephone mediations?
Yeah, so our Risk Management Agency and our rural development cases are always done by phone. And this was years and years ago, found that a lot of those cases can be settled once information is exchanged. And so requesting the mediation a lot of times ends up resolving the mediation, because once they get the information in front of them, they are able to make a change in the determination. So it was costing a lot of money on the parts of different people to have to go to a mediation. So those are done by phone to try to save costs to the program and the agencies. If someone is ever really want to do one in person, we have tried to do that whenever we could, but most of the time those are done by phone. And then Farm Service Agency and Natural Resources Conservation Services are always done in person.
So what do you think are some of the big advantages in mediation in general, and specifically mediations through the Illinois Agriculture Mediation Program?
Yeah, so in general, I think one of the biggest is just the confidentiality of it. Also, for the ag mediation program, I think the two biggest things are, first of all, it's free. So whenever anyone calls and asks us about the program, the only thing that I tell them that it's going to cost them is the time to go through the program. You know, I know time is money to some people sometimes, but when you're being able to have this service for free, it really is a great value, and the producers really enjoy that part of it. The other biggest thing I think for this type of program is that it's a continuing relationship. Usually, if it's a producer or farmer, they're not going to be able to pick up their land and move it to another county to find new county executives to work with. The staff aren't leaving, the farmer's not leaving, and so the mediation might be a way to, even if they don't resolve this dispute, to maybe repair some of that relationship so that they can continue working well together in the future.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. What are the downsides of mediation in comparison to other forms of dispute resolution?
So the only, like I just said, that one of the only downsides I talked to the farmer or producer about is that it does take time. They have to request the mediation. We have to collect paperwork from the parties. We have to schedule the mediation, and then the mediation is held. So if they think they're not going to come to an agreement, it might take up some time that they didn't want to give. To me personally, that's one of the only downsides of this program. I think even when they don't come to an agreement, I believe the last time I looked, 97 to 99% of the participants still had a better understanding of the USDA's position. And so even if they didn't get an agreement, they were able to walk away with a better understanding. So the biggest thing is time, and then downside. And the other downside is I think sometimes people get into the mediation and think they're going to get a decision because they just don't really understand the difference between the mediation and having like a judge or arbitrator make the decision.
Right, and I think that's sometimes the confusion there with what exactly is mediation. So Missy, I know that you work specifically with the Illinois Agriculture Mediation Program, but there are other states around the country that have similar programs. You know, specifically, you know, in New York, I'm on the New York Agriculture Mediation roster, as well as in New Jersey. How many states have similar agriculture mediation programs?
Yeah, so currently, I believe from the last I heard, there are 41. The last one to join that I know of was Georgia. So we're sitting at 41, which is great. When I became involved in 2009, I believe there were 33. So we've really grown over the last few years.
That's fantastic. The number that I had in my head was somewhere like 37 or 38. So it looks like there's been a few other states that have joined in the last few years. So that's fantastic. And for those listeners who aren't in Illinois, that are maybe in Indiana or from any other state from coast to coast, are there a lot of differences in the programs, or are they pretty much using the same protocol?
Yeah, so there's a ton of differences between each program. We do have regulations from the Farm Service Agency on what types of cases we can take, but then after that, every program is totally different.
Well, specifically then with the Illinois Agriculture Mediation Program, how can a farmer listener initiate mediation with you?
Sure. So I noted this, but we just talked about it, is that one thing to note is every state is different. This is just about Illinois. Currently in Illinois, we're only doing those mediations through adverse determination letters. We are hopeful in the next couple years to begin doing ag credit cases. And maybe when that happens, we could do another podcast specific to ag credit. But currently, a producer or farmer will receive an adverse determination letter, and that letter will clearly outline their appeal rights that are available. That letter has clear deadlines on when they can request their appeal by. They have different steps. So they could have anything from a redetermination, a county committee, a state committee, mediation, and then the final step is the National Appeals Division. And so they can only move up the ladder. They can't go backwards. So they can only go from redetermination and up. They can't mediate and go back. So that's one thing that we make sure that people know when they call in is, if you want to go to mediation, that's great, but you won't be able to go back to redetermination if you think that you might want that. And then they have the deadline in the paperwork. Most of the time it's 30 days. Sometimes it's not. It kind of depends on each case. And so that deadline is very, very important. It is calendar days, and I can't accept a case after that. So that is what we tell people when they call in, is just get it in as soon as possible.
So we've got both lawyers and non-lawyers listening to this podcast. And, you know, I do both mediation and litigation in my law practice. And I have to tell you, I'm a huge fan of alternative dispute resolution. I believe, with very few exceptions, that the courtroom is the answer to solve disputes and problems. You know, and for those listeners who are interested in becoming a mediator, or more specifically an agriculture mediator through the agriculture mediation program in their particular state, what are the requirements? What needs to be done?
So this is another part where every state is different. Some states don't have a roster. Their staff do all the mediations. A good amount of us, though, do have rosters. I do know that one general rule is to have mediation background. So generally, they want you to have at least a 30 to 40 hour mediation training. But then after that, every state is different on whether they require you to be an attorney or not. One of our biggest things in Illinois, our list currently are all attorneys, because that's just how it's worked out at this point. But everyone but one of our mediators, who's been with us from the very beginning of time, has some kind of agriculture background. And we think that that's really important, so that when they're at the table, they know what they're talking about, and make the producer have a feeling like they're being heard from that mediator.
And I can only just speak from my experience that in, not just Illinois, but in New York and New Jersey, where I'm on the mediation roster, the requirements to become one of the mediators on the list per se was different from state to state. So in New York, I had to participate in a 30-hour basic mediation program. And in New York, it was quite extensive. I did a 40-hour mediation training. And in addition to that, I did a full apprenticeship with a video at the end that I had to pass. And then after that, I had to apply for the agriculture mediation roster. And in Illinois, the mediators are about ready to have a training. Is that right, Missy?
Yep, this week. We do. So that is one thing that is the same across all states, is that our regulations require us, for our mediators to stay on our list, they have to have 20 hours of continuing education every 2 years. Now, every state handles that differently. Some states will say, you just show me that you have that training to stay on the list. Other states are like us that get together. Some states get together every 2 years for a training. But I really like, because we don't see each other that much, we're all across the state. So in Illinois, we get together once a year for a 10-hour training to meet that regulation for Farm Service Agency.
And why don't you tell our listeners about some of the speakers that are on the roster for the training?
This coming training?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we have someone from Farm Service Agency coming. Let me see. Let me pull up the list. Do you want to pause for a second and I'll pull it up and have it ready?
Yeah, no, that's fine, Missy. I wanted to make a point, though, that last year in comparison to New Jersey and in New York, where I'm also on the roster, I really appreciate the very specific agriculture mediation training. Additionally, it was quite helpful learning more about the different agencies and sub-agencies. I forgot about the housing, the Section 8 housing. I mean, that's just something that in my law practice, I don't really come across that much, right? And so it's really helpful to sort of get that general overview and to get the annual refresher. So I just wanted to comment about that, just from a mediator standpoint.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, this year we have someone from Rural Development Risk Management Agency and Farm Service Agency coming. National Resources Conservation Services couldn't come this year because they just went through a huge staffing change with some retirements. But I do have to say that we really have some really great USDA buy-in in Illinois, that they're willing to come to our trainings and make sure our mediators really understand their program so that they are in a better position to run those mediations.
Now, you previously mentioned in the podcast that it is free for participants, okay, which I think is unbelievable. And this is a resource that I think everyone in the agriculture industry should be utilizing if appropriate. But do the mediators get paid?
Yeah, so the pay is varied by state, but in Illinois, we do pay the mediators. We have a hourly rate for travel, for prep time, and then for actually managing the mediation. Yeah, but that varies by state as well. I don't know what all the other different states do.
And how many mediations are conducted specifically with the agriculture mediation program there in Illinois on an annual basis?
So we used to be, back in like 2009 to 2011, we would have between 50 and 60 cases a year. So it was a good stream of cases. Not all of them went to a full mediation, but a good amount of cases. In the last 2 to 3 years, it's really dropped down to sometimes we're in the 20s. And I've been trying to figure out what that is. Adverse determination numbers have not gone down. And foreclosures have not gone down. So I don't really know what it is. Yeah, so we're trying to figure out different ways. So this is a great way for us, and I thank you for that, to get information out about the program to make sure people know about it.
Do you feel like the program is being properly utilized right now? You're saying that the numbers are down, so I guess what could be done to kind of help increase the numbers with the program?
Yeah, I currently think that it's underutilized. And two main reasons. I think, like we talked earlier, the public still doesn't know really what mediation is. Even on like my Google alerts for mediation, I get articles on meditation where they misspelled it because people just still get them all confused. So yeah. I think that's one of the biggest things. They get this, 2 to 3 page letter that's either denying them for something or saying, hey, you did something wrong, you owe us all this money, and it's just a stressful piece of paper to get. So then to see something that maybe you've never heard of before, I think that can create a barrier. And then the second thing is, some of the agencies we work with that I think might prevent people from contacting us, their form letters are for more than one state. So, some of the agencies might touch different states, and so their form letter, they just plug in the information that they need to, and the mediation is just a form. And so on those, some of the letters say that it might cost them to go to mediation. And I think that the ones where it's very clear that it says this is free, you don't have to pay, I think that's a lot better way to get someone in the door than, we don't know if it's going to cost you or not, you can call and see. So I think those two things can be a hindrance of getting people in the door. The other thing is just making sure people know about the program. And so that's what I've been trying to do over the last couple years, is to try to get the name into attorneys' heads and out into the communities to make sure people know about it.
Yeah, I think you're hitting the nail on the head there. I mean, First of all, I think there's a ton of confusion on what exactly mediation is. And I mean, I know this is a little anomalous because they're getting a letter sort of giving them their rights about mediation. But I think normally in the community, if there's a legal issue, like, for example, I also do family law. people are Googling family law attorney. They're not Googling family law mediator. And so then when they're having a consultation with me and I explain to them, or we can go to court, or you can go to mediation with your spouse, they seem to really love the idea of mediation, but I can't be the mediator at that point because I've already worn my attorney hat. And so I think there's just a lot of confusion on what is mediation, what is it not, both in terms of the community, but also with lawyers. I don't know what your perspective is on that, Missy, but I think even lawyers sometimes don't even really understand exactly what mediation is. And because of that, maybe have some fear on sending their client to mediation, sometimes without them.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I'm surprised. And it's probably because all I do and think about is mediation. So I'm always around mediation folks. But when I meet attorneys that don't understand what it is, I'm still a little surprised by it. And so I just use it as a teachable moment to spread the word, especially in Illinois now, because we're required by our professional code of conducts to tell people about ADR options. And so we as attorneys should understand what those are.
Yeah, last Friday, I probably shouldn't say this, but I was on the phone with an aggressive litigator here in my community. And she was like, Carrie, I know you're a mediator, but this is litigation. This is not mediation. And, you know, we need to have a global issue. We can't solve little things at a time. And, you know, I just thought that was interesting because as a mediator, I feel like I've learned so much even more about litigation and really thinking through the issues, because oftentimes what people say that they're fighting about is not really what they're actually fighting about. And this is so true. And
I agree.
Across the board, not just in family law or agriculture disputes, but in every kind of dispute.
Yeah, I agree.
So Missy, I'm curious on how do you foresee the future of agriculture mediation programs throughout the country, or specifically in Illinois?
Well, so just from my short time being involved with them, I believe they're going to continue to grow. I mean, they've added at least 8 to 9 new programs in the last 9 years. So I think they're going to continue to be a resource for the states. Illinois, my goal is to continue to spread the word about it, to make sure people know about it, so that more people can utilize it, because I do definitely think that it's underutilized at this time.
Yeah, and I know that more programs aren't free and that money has to come from somewhere, but I think that there's a lot of different kinds of disputes that can certainly be mediated. You know, in New Jersey, they also mediate right to farm disputes. So, and I think that there's also talk in some states and trying to get funding with multi-generational farm, estate, and succession planning. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that. Do you think that mediation would be a useful tool for that?
Oh yes, for sure. And I know, and I'm not on this legislative committee, but I know that there are some people in the ag mediation world across the country that have talked to legislature about the fact that those are so needed, and we just can't do it with our funding currently because the regulations outline what we can do. And so trying to talk to them and have them see the benefit of what that would do for us. And as we all know, the Farm Bill is up and going back and forth, and that's how we're funded. So we might see some changes, we might not. But yeah, I think that there's so many different ways, especially in the succession planning, or even in the divorce aspect, if they're divorcing, and we should be able to do the whole thing, not just just the land issue.
Yeah, absolutely. With that in mind, are some agriculture mediation programs taking private funding to help facilitate mediations in other areas?
Yeah, so I think each program is different. So some of them are housed in like a Department of Agriculture. So I don't think that they could take funding. I don't know. But then there's some of us that are in nonprofits, and then there's other programs that are in universities. So as a nonprofit, I could raise funds and take grants to do other things like we do outside of our ag program. So I think it would just depend on the program and their setup on whether or not they could take different funding sources.
So Missy, how can people find you online and learn more about the Illinois Agriculture Mediation Program?
Okay, so we are ilagmediation.org. And so it's ilagmediation.org. And then, or you can go to dri-inc.org. And we also have a Facebook page for Dispute Resolution Institute and for the mediation program. And then the other thing that I would say would be really interesting for your people to know is about the Coalition of Agricultural Mediators. Would you like me to talk about that for a second?
Yeah, what is that?
So the Coalition of Agricultural Mediation Programs, or we're also known as CAMP, is a network of all of the USDA certified state programs that are offering these mediation services to the ag community. We have meetings every year to discuss what each other are doing in our respective states, and we have a meeting with our grant monitor as well at that time. So the CAMP website is one of the best ways to get information on your state if you're outside of Illinois, and that website is agriculturemediation.org.
Fantastic. Missy, thanks so much for your time, and I guess I will see you in a few days there in Springfield for the mediation training.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks again.
Bye-bye.
Welcome back to another edition of Ask Carrie. And today's question comes from a rancher all the way out in Wyoming. And he writes, how do I make a FOIA request? FOIA stands for Freedom of Information Act. And again, the law on this area can change a little bit from state to state. As a warning here, the FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act, is actually a federal statute. So depending on your particular need, every state, for the most part, has a state statute. For example, in the state of New York, it's called the Freedom of Information Law request. So you might have to make not only a FOIA request, but a request pursuant to the state law in your particular state. I believe in Wyoming it's also called FOIA, but I'd have to double check on that. So here's some steps on making a FOIA request. First and foremost, you need to decide if the information is already publicly available. You know, for example, the National Ag Law Center has a lot of great resources that are available on there. Various federal and state agencies have information that is publicly available. Perhaps it's, you know, been filed with the court. So first of all, maybe you don't even need to do a FOIA request. So you need to double check to make sure that it's not publicly available. Second of all, you need to choose the government agency to request the documents from. Are we making a request at the federal level or the state level? Perhaps we're making it at both. If we're making it at the federal level, then which specific entity are we making the request from? Is it going to be the U.S. Department of Agriculture? Is it going to be the FDA? Is it the EPA? Who are we dealing with specifically? Step 3 is actually drafting the FOIA request letter. Some things that you must keep in mind, must include there in the letter would be things like the contact information, a description of the records requested. I would lean towards being as specific as you can there. Include the maximum amount of money that you're willing to pay without additional authorization. There is some fees that go along with making these FOIA requests, such as hourly fees and printing costs, etc. You need to give written authorization from a person at the business or that's able to make those decisions. Like, for example, if you're operating your farm under an LLC, then one of the members of that LLC should be making that request, or an agent, like your attorney, can certainly make this on your behalf. The next step, step 4, is to actually wait for the government to respond. They need to respond within 20 days. Doesn't mean that they're going to produce and give you all the information within 20 days. You're going to usually get a nice little formal letter that says, hey, we need more time. But you should hear from them within a few weeks. And then at a certain point, you'll hear back from them. They'll produce the documents. You need to pay any applicable fees. Then you need to review what they gave you. Did they give you everything that they asked for? Do you need to send in another request? Did they keep back things that they shouldn't have kept back? And I'll give you an example. I also do some SNAP stuff with supplemental nutrition assistance programs. And so a fairly common practice when doing that type of work that you would make a FOIA request. And sometimes the U.S. Department of Agriculture will withhold documents that they're not supposed to withhold. And if they do that, then you can actually appeal it. So that would be the last step, if appropriate, that you'd like to go ahead and do there. So those are some quick steps on how to make a FOIA request. You could certainly do that on your own, or to go ahead and make that request via your counsel. If you have a question for me, please go ahead and email me at Carrie, CARI, @rinkerlaw.com. Again, that's Carrie @rinkerlaw.com.